Hi, ladies. Welcome back to Ladies Bible Study. My name is Starr, and I'm the pastor's wife here at New Hope Baptist, and this is our Holy Women Bible Study that you've landed on. If you're new, I hope you'll take a minute to introduce yourself and let us know how you found the Bible study. And if you're one of our regulars, welcome back. Today we're going to do the second half of our study on Ruth. We began this study last week. Wonderful study on the lady named Ruth. Wonderful woman in Scripture. So much we can learn from her life. What a blessed example. Her name literally means friend or friendship or compassionate friend. And I find that really extra sweet because I have a granddaughter named Ruth, and I hope she grows up to be that way, just a compassionate friend to everybody. I think there's something in a name. But if you missed last week's lesson, I hope you'll go back and listen so that this week's lesson will make more sense. I did say last week in the lesson that we didn't know much about Ruth's family in Moab, but we knew that she had a father and mother because when Boaz spoke with her, he mentions her parents. And so we do know that much. And we know she left them behind, and probably most assuredly other family, right, that she left behind in Moab to follow Naomi and ultimately the God of Naomi. We also know that she had a husband, Mahlon, and she could have been married as long as up to 10 years to him because that's how long Naomi's family was in the country of Moab. So we don't know which of those years that Elimelech and his sons died, how close together they died or whatever. But it's possible that Ruth and her husband could have been married up to 10 years. And then we know that Ruth was the great-grandmother of King David, ultimately. So we'll pick it up there. We got through number 8 last week, and today we're going to start with number 9. So if you have your Bible and your notebook, and your lesson, you can get that out, and we'll start here. I didn't write down the chapter for this one. I'm sorry. But the first question is, how did the Lord bless Ruth as a result of her faith? And so not only did, we talked about this a little bit last week, but not only did he give her a place in the family of God, because we see in this story of Ruth, it says, the Lord recompense thy work, and a full reward be given thee of the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings thou art come to trust. And that was Boaz speaking to her. But not only did he place her in God's family, but he literally placed her in the lineage of Jesus Christ. That was like an added blessing. He didn't have to do that for her, but he did. And remember, I mentioned last week that Ruth would have been one of those people that you call the least of these, one of the least of these. He took her to remind us and put her in his lineage to remind us that anybody can be saved. Anybody, from the smallest to the greatest. And I think that's just wonderful that he put that example in there for us. But he put her in the lineage of Christ, and that was like an added blessing. Can you think of any other people that he did that with, right off the top of your head? The first one I thought of was Rahab, also in the lineage of Jesus Christ. But there's also in the book of Matthew, you'll see inserts 4 different women into the lineage there, along with the huge list of men. He includes these women's names, and we know that there were women in the lineage of Jesus, but he mentions ladies like Tamar. He mentions her, and then he mentions Rahab, and then Ruth, and then the wife of Uriah, which we know was Bathsheba. I don't know why Matthew chooses to include these particular women in the genealogy while passing over like matriarchs like Sarah and Rebecca and Leah. I don't know why he didn't include their names, but it's not for us to know. But I just think it's neat that these ladies who came from rough backgrounds that God was able to use, and look where they ended up, so don't despair. If you have someone that needs to be saved, don't ever give up on them. God can take people and do great things with them. Number 10 says, how did he use her to bless others, meaning Ruth? So we know that Ruth was a blessing to her mother-in-law, Naomi, of course. That is the big thing that we see there, that she was a blessing to her mother-in-law. She had great love for her. She chose to stay with her and take care of her physical needs, and she went out to work, to glean in the fields, to do that. And they both were really just in survival mode. They were two widow ladies, trying to make it. And they had gone from a life of being married, provided for, protected. I don't know how much wealth they would have had, They left Bethlehem, Judah when it was in the midst of famine and went to Moab, but now they're back and they're basically in poverty. and they're looking for somebody to redeem Elimelech's land, and Naomi, who's husbandless, and they're in survival mode. And can you imagine what it was? Can you imagine what a blessing it was for Naomi to have Ruth choose to come alongside and stay with her, to not have to go through that deep grief by herself? She might not have realized that she wanted Ruth to stay with her, but I would imagine deep down inside, she probably thought, man, what a blessing. I have somebody with me to go through this with. And then, of course, after Ruth's marriage to Boaz, there were children brought up in the family. And what a comfort that was to Naomi's heart. Verse 14 says, And the women said unto Naomi, Blessed be the Lord, which hath not left thee this day without a kinsman, that his name may be famous in Israel. And he shall be unto thee a restorer of life, and a nourisher of thine old age. For thy daughter-in-law, which loveth thee, which is better to thee than 7 sons, hath borne him. So that kind of gives you the treasure. That gives you the idea of the treasure that Ruth was to Naomi. She's better than 7 sons to Naomi. So God used her to be a blessing to Boaz in making her his wife, providing her as a wife for him. Besides hearing the townspeople talk about her, there must have been something about her that Boaz noticed immediately, right? He went through all the needed steps in making sure that she could be his wife. And I'm sure he was just elated to hear that this other kinsman that was nearer than him, he was probably a bit elated to hear that man could not fulfill that obligation. And so can you just imagine his heart just skipping a beat when the man's like, oh, I'm sorry, I can't. Oh, okay, no problem. I'll take care of it, And then he used Ruth to be a blessing to the reapers in Boaz's field. I can imagine that she had a kind and compassionate witness in her daily life. I feel like Ruth was one of those ladies that just had this meek and quiet spirit, and everywhere she went, she lit up the room, not because she was like large and in charge and a people person and brought the party with her, not because she was that kind of person, but sometimes people that have that meek, just humble, sweet spirit about them can light up a room brighter than the loudest party person. Don't you think so? There's just something that draws you to them, that you want to be around them. And I feel like Ruth was that kind of person. I don't believe that the reapers probably ever heard a discontent word come out of her mouth, and even, and I'm sure in her heart she was grieving, but she had a purpose, and her purpose was to live life and to take care of her mother-in-law and make this thing work. She was determined, but I can imagine the workplace, what a huge difference it made to have her there. If any of you have worked outside the home, you've seen how catty it can be when you get a bunch of women working in the same room, all these hot flashes and, just things that women deal with, that make them grouchy and sarcastic and cynical and, catty. And man, it can be tough sometimes to get a whole bunch of women together in one room and get them to work together. But I can imagine that Ruth being there probably brought a whole new dynamic to the workplace, And I just love that thought about her. I don't know if it's so. That's just what I imagine, just from what I read about her. But I would imagine her presence there probably just changed the whole atmosphere. And I don't know if I mentioned this last week, but if you do work outside the home and you come into the workplace where a bunch of your coworkers are they happy to see you? Or do they like make themselves scarce? Oh, she's here. Better get busy. Let me go do my work, I hope you don't have that kind of effect on people. I hope when you come into the room, people are so happy to see you. And then another way that God used Ruth to be a blessing, he used her to be a blessing to her future family, because we know she had children, and then there were grandchildren, and ultimately, like I said, leading to her lineage to the Lord Jesus Christ. And then he used her to be a blessing to me, because she's a wonderful, godly example that I can follow, try to pattern my life after. I just love it. I love this story. Number 11 says, what was Ruth's attitude toward her past sorrow and heartache? And if you remember, Moab is where they were traveling from, and it's the land where her husband had died. also her father-in-law and her brother-in-law. So lots of grief, lots of heartache had happened there in Moab. Lots of sorrow had been experienced by her in her short life. And we don't, and scholars think that maybe Ruth was about 30 or 40, I guess, when she married Boaz. So she was a young adult woman, I guess you'd say, an adult woman. She'd been around a little while. But I believe chapter 1 sheds a little bit of light on that question about her attitude towards her past sorrow and heartache, because chapter 1 verse 16 it says, and Ruth said, and this was when Naomi was encouraging the two daughters-in-law to go back home, go back to your people. So in chapter 1 verse 16 Ruth says, entreat me not to leave thee or to return from following after thee, for whither thou goest I will go, and where thou lodgest I will lodge, for thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. Where thou diest will I die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me and more also, if aught but death part thee and me. When she saw that she was steadfastly minded to go with her, then she left speaking unto her, meaning Naomi didn't say any more to her about it. She knew her mind wasn't going to be changed. So rather than, if you think about it, rather than wallowing in her grief, which she probably had much, chewing on it and getting bitter about it, why me? I'm young. I'm without a husband. I have no children. She could have gone down that path. That's a choice, right? But she was willing, I feel like, to leave that in the past and go on. She was intent on going forward because she knew that was a better place. It was a better thing to go forward rather than to stay in the past. And she was intent. She knew it was helpful. It was good. It was right. It was the right thing to do, to go forward. A better place for her after all that she'd gone through. And she knew that there would be help from the Lord as she followed him. And she couldn't be swayed in her decision either. There was nothing Naomi could say that would make her go back. And I've noticed that about a lot of people when they are involved in a grieving type of situation. Something has happened, maybe you've lost a loved one or something catastrophic has happened in your life. Maybe there's a sickness or some other kind of loss. Many people are afraid to move on from that. And notice I didn't say get over it, but just to move on, to take steps forward, just keep going. Many people are afraid to move forward. I think they almost feel guilty about it, like they're forsaking maybe the person that they lost. I think sometimes people fail to believe that they can heal and be okay in time. They fail to see that or think that or to believe that. So they just choose to stay in that grief because it feels familiar. And it brings security to them, they think. And rather than letting the Lord comfort them and help them through that, they want to just stay in the grief where it feels familiar. So don't do that. Let me encourage you to just move forward as the Lord, and let the Lord help you, because he will. Number 12 says, do you think that Ruth was lucky, or do you think God rewarded her for her deeds? Well, I don't believe in luck. I'm a believer. I believe in blessings. But I would say it was most definitely a blessing and a reward from God, because we reap what we sow, right? God rewards kindness and he rewards obedience. In Galatians chapter 6, verse 7, it says, be not deceived, God is not mocked, for whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. So it's the law of sowing and reaping. What you reap, you sow, or what you sow, you reap. Give, Luke 6:38 says, give and it shall be given unto you, good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, and get this part, shall men give into your bosom. For with the same measure that you meet withal, it shall be measured to you again. And then Psalm 19 speaks of the law of the Lord, and many of you probably know the scripture song that goes along with that passage. And the last half of verse 11 says, and in keeping of them, meaning God's laws, in keeping of them, there is great reward. And we know that Ruth selflessly sowed seeds of kindness everywhere she went. That's what she was about, was kindness, just helping people, being compassionate. And it's no wonder that she was able to enjoy the blessings in her life that she did, from God. And in her story, we can see that genuine love sometimes requires sacrifice on our part, doesn't it? We have to put ourselves aside and just love people and be a help to them, uncompromisingly sacrifice for others. And regardless of our lot in life, we can live according to the precepts of God. We can. We can still be loving. We can still be kind no matter what has happened in our life. We can still do those things. And God will reward those things when you have them in your life. It might not be today. It might not be tomorrow, next week, next month. But God does reward obedience and kindness in our life. He does. And He abundantly blesses people who seek to live a life like that, a life of obedience. God extends mercy to the merciful. And we see that Ruth was a merciful lady, wasn't she? And it reminds me of the verse in Proverbs 10:22 that says, "The blessing of the Lord, it maketh rich, and He addeth no sorrow with it." So He blesses us, and not just blesses us, but it makes us rich in every way. Number 13, and I think this is the last one, the most time-wise as far as talking about it. But this is the one that I wasn't looking forward to sharing or whatever, but I thought about just saying, answer this, and it could be like between you and the Lord, but I think we'll go ahead and spend a few minutes talking about it. Number 13 says, tell of a time when you put a bad experience behind you, gave yourself to serving God and others, and were blessed of God as a result. I'll be right back. I am not tech savvy. So when my nose gets drippy, allergies, and it's weird. Anyway, I'm not techie, so I don't know how to just erase certain segments of the video. So you get the real me, the whole shebang. Aren't you happy? Anyways, tell of a time when you put a bad experience behind you, gave yourself to serving God and others, and were blessed of God as a result. Well, because of my age, and most of you know how old I am, but because of my age and the number of years that I've been saved, I've experienced a lot of hardship in my life. And I'm not the kind of person that walks around saying, oh, woe is me, look at all these terrible things that have happened in my life, because I feel like that kind of thing, I don't know, that I don't like that kind of negative, my nose is so itchy all of a sudden. I don't like that kind of negative talk, those kind of negative thoughts. I prefer to look at the things God has done for me and the blessings in my life and all the things I get to enjoy because He loves me. But there have been some hard things that have happened in my life that I've learned from. And there's been some really dark things, some really scary things, unknown things to me, going down paths that I have asked, boy, what's happening here? What is this leading to? Or why is this happening? Very, very scary things. And I was just telling my granddaughter not too long ago that I can look back and remember times like that. But when I look at them, I know at the time that I went through them, they were dark and scary and unknown. But when I think back on them, that's not what I remember. I don't remember the fear and the unknown and the darkness of it all. I don't remember hardly any of that. But what I do remember is what I learned through those things, through those dark and scary times. So, we learn. There's something to be learned through every trial. And I just had to remember to keep my mind stayed on Christ. And Isaiah 26:3 has always been one of my favorite verses. And just remembering that verse helped me to stay under the thing and just be still and know that He had it in control. Now looking back over the years, like I said, I really do have a hard time remembering the fear of going through any of those trials, even some of the really hard ones. But I do remember what God taught me. And I suppose some of the most memorable things, bad experiences or whatever, that I've gone through would be, going way back, thinking about the death of my older brother. He was only 28 when he died in a really tragic accident. I think about the loss of grandchildren. We have 6 waiting for us in heaven. Each one of them was just a tremendous heartache to us and to our children, watching our children go through that, knowing that they wanted those little ones. We wanted those little ones, but watching our children go through such deep grief, that's hard. And many of you have been there, maybe losing children yourself, or if you're older, watching your children lose children. That is hard. Then I think of the death of my parents. I think of our youngest daughter going through childhood cancer and brushing near death. She could have died. She could have also been barren because of the chemotherapy that she went through for that year. There were a lot of prayers said over her, a lot of fasting. We had her anointed. They're just, we were very serious about walking with God during that time and just being patient and following his lead in that thing, because we had no idea what was happening there. But dealing with that heartache, that lasted several years, and I could write a book just about that, what we went through with that, with Hannah. But I'm so thankful that the Lord healed her of that cancer and gave her such a sweet family of her own. What a blessing. And now she's due to have number 6. So she has 4 right now, 2 in heaven. Let's see here. She has Gideon, Susanna, Eli, and Adam. So she has 4 right now, 2 in heaven, and 1 on the way. So God has blessed that young lady, and I'm so thrilled. I think of the death of my in-laws. Both of those were very hard to go through. And then the death of a ministry that we served in for 15 years. That was a huge part of our life, a huge chunk of our life. And that's kind of where our kids grew up, was in that last ministry that we served in. And did I struggle with each of those things? You bet I did, because I made of flesh. But I had to eventually just let God help me, let him comfort me and sustain me. I didn't have hordes and scores of people lining up at my door waiting to like cheer me on or hold me up or anything like that. It's just not the way things happen sometimes. I didn't have scores of people standing around waiting to encourage me. It's okay. There were random texts and notes from people, encouragements here and there, and God sustained us through love offerings of people that we knew, and my hubby would go out and preach and sing and minister, to take care of our needs. But sometimes, when you go through a heavy trial like that, sometimes there are things you have to go through by yourself. Just go through it alone, not alone, but basically by yourself with just you and the Lord. You have to get through those valleys just hand in hand with the Father. And if we don't keep our eyes on him, it can begin to feel really lonely and discouraging. And we start digging our own pit. And I had to constantly remind myself that the eternal God is thy refuge, and underneath are the everlasting arms. And so that's a good place to rest. I had to trust that he knew what was best. And it's like the picture, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it's a picture of a little girl standing before the Lord, and she's hugging real tight this favorite, you could tell it's probably a favorite stuffed animal that she has. And he's extending his arm to her as if to say, give that to me, and you can tell she has the fear of losing something that's very dear to her. If she does that, this fear is written all over her face, but she doesn't know that hidden behind his back is a bigger and better stuffed animal that he has already prepared for her, but he's just waiting for her to surrender that smaller thing, and that picture has always preached such a convicting sermon to my heart, because that's life, right? It preaches a convicting sermon about trust. And I don't really like talking about past hurts because, like I said, I don't think they're healthy. And I like to look at the positive and the things that God has done for me. But I know I've learned some things through all the trials that we've gone through. But probably the most prominent would be the death of our last ministry that we were in. And when I look back on that, it felt like somebody just jerked a rug out from underneath of us, because it took us by such surprise. And we would have stayed there until we died. We were committed to that ministry there. And as a matter of fact, we saw a lady walk the aisle and be saved just the Sunday before we left. And that was a heartache, that seeing that lady be saved and then leaving the very next Sunday. I'm still really truthfully uncertain what happened there. When I look back on that, I just have to shake my head and think, what in the world? What happened? But what I do know was that it was dark, it was wicked, and the devil clapped his slimy cold hands in victory and breathed out his vile, noxious breath in a laugh and a snicker at all that took place. And that really hurt more than anything. The shame brought on the Lord's name through all of that. And it affected me so negatively in my physical body that I developed really bad vertigo, a really serious case of vertigo and tremors. And I could barely walk across the floor without help. Walking outside was a challenge because of curbs and things like that. I remember the church that we were at, the altar, like the floor slanted downwards to go to the altar. And so the couple of times that I tried to go to the altar, I felt like I was going to be like Jack and Jill, like tumbling down the hill, because that's the way it felt when I walked forward, that I'm like, oh boy, I'm not going to be able to stop. So that was an embarrassment, but it messed with me physically. The trauma of that death affected me physically. And my doctor, when I went to him about it all, he put me on meds to help with the vertigo, but all it did was make me want to sleep. And when I wasn't sleeping, I was crying. So I was a hot mess. I really was. I was a mess. And in my flesh, I was hurt. And I wanted to just throw in the towel because everybody hurts you, right? That was my mindset. Everybody hurts you. I wasn't angry, and I didn't have hate in my heart. I wasn't like that. I wasn't bitter. But I was very grieved over how God's people had behaved themselves. I didn't understand it, and I didn't know what happened. We had shell shock. I feel like it was kind of like PTSD. I really do. And we took about 9 months off to just be still and be quiet and heal in our hearts and in our spirits. And I'm so, so thankful for dear friends that allowed our whole family to come, because our son and his wife were working with us there in the church. And this dear preacher and his wife took us all in, just graciously took us in and let us stay there to lick our wounds for a while and heal up in our hearts. And the preaching and the kindness and the rest, all of it together was just exactly what we needed. But when we moved to the new work where we're at right now, I still wasn't right in my heart, and I knew it. I still wasn't right in my heart and in my spirit, and I wasn't walking around like a rain cloud. I wasn't grumpy, stuff like that. I wasn't that kind of spirit, but I just wasn't right. I knew it, and the Lord knew it. But I'm so thankful for his compassion, his mercy, his patience, his long suffering, all of that. I just wasn't ready. I wasn't ready to jump back in to everything that I was in before. I was just very reserved in the amount of time that I allowed myself to surrender to ministry things. I was just very reserved. And I know that sounds terrible. I promise you it wasn't in any kind of hatred or bitterness or anything. It wasn't anything like that. The people here were so kind, so gracious, compassionate, just helpful and giving. They've been hurt very deeply too, the people here had. And it's amazing to me still how God just took us and did that with us, put a hurting preacher's family with a hurting church, and we just kind of healed together. And it just has been so sweet. I promise you it has. But I was just still reeling from all that had happened. Hadn't even been a year when we came here. Hadn't even been a full year when we came here. But I did my daily spiritual duties, to try to keep myself going forward as best I could, But I chose to keep everyone at arm's length, and I wouldn't let anyone get very close to me. And it wasn't in a snarky, mean, it wasn't in that kind of spirit. I just was reserved, quiet, And one Sunday I sat in the service and I was listening to my husband preach, and the Lord just started working on me, and he convicted me through that message. And I can't remember what the name of the message was, but I remember that it convicted me about my lack of trust for the future. And the Lord broke my stubborn spirit about all of that, and the wall came down, and I really was acting pretty selfishly. I was acting like I was the only one who'd ever been hurt, and honestly, I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. This is like the honeymoon stage. It's going to end. Somebody's going to get upset about something, and it's going to happen again. That kind of was my mindset, but in a nice way. Does that make sense? But I had to realize that others had been wounded in that battle too, not just me. I wasn't the only one that was hurt, but I could only see my hurt because my focus was totally inward, completely selfish. And that happens. It happens in hard circumstances. It does. Our bodies go into these fight or flight modes, and we find we're self-protecting, and we're totally discounting the one who can perfectly protect us and sustain us, we feel like we need to do it ourselves, It's a pride thing. But once I stopped acting like a martyr, and trust me, I had had sufficient time to grieve the loss and deal with it. I had come to grips with it, but it was a choice that I was making every day to wrap that hardship, that circumstance, that grief around me like a warm security blanket. And like I said, I wasn't hateful or resentful or anything like that. I was just very introverted, very reserved, very quiet and cautious, and just watching. That's basically what I was doing. I was just watching people, and still just reeling from everything that happened. But I knew I wasn't giving all of myself to the Lord. I knew it. And I had to realize that not everyone is out to hurt me, right? Not everyone is out to hurt me. Not every church family is alike. And that's what I had to finally admit, So if you're going through something, some kind of deep hurt, it's good for you to remember that not everyone is against you. Not everyone is. Not everyone is out to hurt you. There are people who love you. There are people who care about you, and they want what's best for you. And the positive that came out of that dark time, we've been here over 12 years now, and I'm still, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart, I'm still amazed at the amount of unity, the spirit of unity that I see in this church. The level of service among the church family, it's amazing. It is. Sometimes I'll sit up in the choir on Sunday morning, I'll look out the sea of faces, and I'll just look at people and think, they serve here and here and here and there, and that person serves there and there and there. I can look at just about every face and in my mind place them in a ministry somewhere in the church, multiple ministries. It's amazing. Sometimes when I have to throw out a sign-up list for meals or something that's happening or whatever, I kid you not, sometimes that list is filled up in a matter of hours. Hours. Thank you, social media. Yes, I can do it all, on our chat groups or whatever. So it gets done a lot quicker. But they're on it, and I'm so thankful for that. But wonderful, precious church family, and I love them dearly. The Lord has blessed us with that. And I really feel like since we hung in and just did our best to just stay faithful and be obedient, God was like, I'm done with you here, and now I'm going to move you here, and here's your blessing. Thanks for being faithful. That's just the way I feel about it, and it's just such a privilege to serve him here with them, serve together with them. And looking back, I can clearly see now that I was that little girl that was hugging that little tiny stuffed animal, and I didn't know. Had I been willing to surrender and give it all up, I would have seen that God had something much better just waiting for me, just waiting for me to surrender it up, and that's the way he is with all of us, if we'll just trust him and surrender up the things that we think are so precious and such a treasure to us, we hang on to those. But he's got something so much better planned for us if we'll just give what we have to him, let him do his work in our life. I loved this portion of the Holy Women Bible study. The book of Ruth, it's a story of God's grace in the midst of very difficult circumstances. And we see her example of living through it. I've just given you a testimony of how I came through a very difficult circumstance. And Ruth, she was willing to lay down her future to care for Naomi. She laid down her own future to care for her mother-in-law. She was a very unselfish woman. She was humble. She was sincere, not a pretentious bone in her body. And remember last week I said she didn't feel the need to announce her good deeds to everybody. Look what I did for Naomi. Everybody noticed this. She wasn't that kind of person. And that's actually, when I thought about that after I taught the lesson, I thought, well, that's one of the attributes of the virtuous woman. In Proverbs 31, it says, favor is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman that feareth the Lord, she shall be praised. So the whole city was talking about her, right? Give her of the fruit of her hands, and let her own works praise her in the gates. So I thought that was sweet that Naomi had that character trait in her life. Ruth had that in her life. Ruth was a foreigner who needed a future. She walked in integrity. She did what she could, no matter the effort. She did what she needed to do. And her future rested in the compassion and loving kindness of another. And that's us. We need a future. And our hope and our Boaz is Jesus Christ. He's our Redeemer, right? Have you seen God at work in your life through very difficult circumstances? I'm sure you have. I'm sure you have. And if you want to share, privately or whatever, I'd love to read your testimonies of how God has helped you through your difficult circumstances. I know some of you have suffered some deep hurt in your lives, and God has helped you. But if you're having a hard time seeing His hand in your life, why don't you sit down this week and write out a list of all the things that God has done for you. Start from the smallest to the largest. Look at things He's done for you just today. Look at things He's done for you this week or this month or this year or during your years being saved in your life. Just start writing down all the things He's done for you. And it'll bring you up out of the doldrums. It will. It'll encourage. It's just encouraging yourself in the Lord. Look what He's done for me. Look at all these good things He's blessed me with. Don't look at the hard things. That can get discouraging. Look at the things He's done for you and just trust Him and realize He has it under control. And in this book of Ruth that we've just studied here, I know it's a short book, but we recognize in her story that God's always at work in our lives. Always at work, in the good and the bad experiences, right? And what we might consider to be bad might not be eternally bad, right? It might just seem bad at the moment. It might not be forever bad, but instead it might actually turn out to be a blessing if you'll just hang on and be patient and wait for God's timing. Don't try to hurry the thing along. Just wait for Him. Be patient. God always has a plan. And I always say that a lot, but it's the truth. He always has a plan. And if we seek Him first, we'll reap the benefits of watching it unfold before our eyes, right? Just be still and let Him be God, right? And He'll help you through whatever difficult circumstances that you find yourself in. He'll take you up in His arms and He'll sustain you. He will. I promise you, He will. He'll take care of you. He'll fill you with peace. He'll give you hope. And then in turn, once you get through that thing, you can turn around and help somebody else that's coming along the way. And you can say, look, I've been there. I've been through something really difficult and the Lord helped me. And I know He'll help you. It's kind of what I'm doing with you today, right? But the Lord can use you that way. What we see in Ruth is an example of the virtuous woman, like I mentioned a minute ago in Proverbs 31. So in addition to being devoted to her family and faithfully dependent upon God, we see in her a woman of godly speech. Her words were loving, they were kind, they were helpful, they were respectful, both to Naomi and to Boaz. So, and we know that the virtuous woman in Proverbs 31, it says that she opens her mouth with wisdom, and in her tongue is the law of kindness. So we could search far and wide to look for a woman today like Ruth, but I think we'd be hard-pressed to find one. But she's a fine example and a wonderful role model for us to pattern our lives after. I believe so. So thanks for hanging in with me for this study on Ruth. It's been a good one, and I'll send out the notes for the next study here. We start VBS tonight, so I don't know if I'll get it done yet today, but I'll get it done this week. So thanks for hanging in there. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and a wonderful week. And look for somebody to be a blessing to, be kind to, be compassionate to, be patient with, right? Just be a help to someone this week. And look for someone to give the gospel to, right? I love you all, and I'll see you next week.